a shattered jaw, a cradle of rotting hay, a flicker of torchlight revealing bloodied thighs and torn linen. The corpse lay beneath the floorboards for 3 days before a rat disturbed the quiet. The smell reached the steward first, then the guards, then the emperor's wife. This was the fate of a boy once worshipped like a god in the palace of Domitian. Today we reveal the tragic rise and brutal unraveling of the emperor's secret concubine, a tale of flesh polished like marble, of survival masked as pleasure, and a youth devoured by the empire he was taught to adore. He was born beneath the vomitorium of a second-rate amphitheater on the eastern edge of Rome, where the city choked on its own grandeur. His mother, a Numidian kitchen slave, bled him into the world during a lunar eclipse, her screams masked by a drunken brawl overhead. No name was given, only the mark of ownership inked into his thigh days later, a curling brand that would blister, scab, and never quite fade. From the beginning, he was never meant for the mines. Not even for the kitchens. His bones were delicate, his eyes the color of wet olives, his flesh pale and unblemished despite the filth around him. The mistress of the house noticed first, lifting his chin with 2 fingers as he crawled at her feet during one of her wine-soaked baths. "Soft," she murmured. "Keep him clean." And so they did. While other children scrubbed latrines and lifted chamber pots, he was brushed with goat's milk, fed slivers of salted fig, and forbidden to play rough. A eunuch from the east was brought in to train his posture. He learned to blink slowly, to smile without showing teeth, and to walk with shoulders slightly dipped, meek but elegant. Historians still argue whether such grooming was standard or exceptional. Some suggest he was one of many. Others argue he was curated for one specific purpose, like a statue commissioned for a temple long before the architect arrived. What is certain is that by the age of 7, he had never seen his own reflection, but already knew that his value lay in his silence and his skin. At 8, he was sent to a villa outside Baiae, a resort town infamous for its orgiastic excess. Officially, it was a school. In practice, it was a collection point, a menagerie of rare children selected for their grace, obedience, and ability to endure long hours of stillness while being studied by drunken senators and idle aristocrats. He spent his days being bathed, measured, and retrained. By 9, he had been taught 6 ways to bow. By 10, he had been renamed twice. They called him Silvanus now, after the god of wild groves and hidden things. Fringe records from a local merchant mention a boy with shoulders like poured wax and the voice of a flute. Whether this was Silvanus is unknown. What is documented is a shipment of perfumed oils, salves, and cloth of gold arriving in the villa the same week Emperor Domitian passed through Baiae on a tour of the coastal estates. The emperor was known for his indulgence in extremes, rare delicacies, brutal punishments, and beautiful things that looked better when caged. Domitian did not meet Silvanus that night, but the imperial steward did, and 2 weeks later, the boy was summoned to Rome. He left the sea with no belongings but the ointments in his satchel. In the litter that carried him to the capital, he sat upright and silent, his hands folded in the lap of a tunic that smelled faintly of myrrh. Rome bloomed around him like a wound, glorious, loud, and steaming with dung. He saw his first corpse that day, crushed beneath a runaway cart, his fingers twitching in the dust. No one stopped. No one screamed. Silvanus didn't blink. Inside the Palladium, the boy was given new quarters, clean stone, warm water, and linens too fine to bleed on. A physician examined him for scars. There were none. The steward nodded once. "He'll fetch a feast," he muttered, then sealed the door behind him. Silvanus was 11. During this period, Roman imperial households were known for their sprawling network of slaves, freedmen, concubines, and spies. It wasn't uncommon for emperors to keep dozens of pleasure attendants, male and female alike. But what set Silvanus apart, even then, was his refinement. He didn't simply obey. He floated. He anticipated. He knew how to pause just long enough before offering anything, as if granting a gift, not a duty. A dry academic dispute still lingers about whether Silvanus was castrated during these years. One scroll implies his voice remained bell-like and high, even as he reached manhood. Others argue he retained his full anatomy, which would have been unusual, but not impossible. Domitian was known for indulging in contradictions. The truth, as always, is lost in the layers of ash and ink. By the time he was 13, Silvanus had never once been touched with cruelty. Every hand that reached for him was soft, perfumed, and careful. But that, he would later reflect, was its own kind of violence. Because it meant he was no longer human. He was an offering. The auction block was not in a market. It was a garden. High walls, tall hedges, statues of Venus and Apollo half draped in ivy, a silken canopy to block the sun, and a marble platform polished until it shimmered like bone. This was where Rome sold its most precious flesh, where senators, governors, and imperial stewards came to bid in whispers, not shouts. There were no shackles here, no screaming children, only beauty and silence, and the sound of coins clicking softly between gloved fingers. Silvanus was 14. He had been prepared for this day since birth, though he had never been told as much. They woke him early, shaved his body again, rubbed his skin with olive oil and saffron until it gleamed. A slave woman daubed a streak of red across his lips. Another pulled his hair into a loose knot, pinned with a silver clasp shaped like a dolphin. "Don't look at anyone too long," she warned him, her voice dry. "Especially not the old ones." But he did. That was the trick. The old ones paid the most. He was the fifth offering that morning, following a flute-playing boy from Massilia and a mute Syrian dancer who walked barefoot across coals. Silvanus didn't perform. He simply stepped onto the marble, bowed slowly, and stood still. There was a pause, then a stir. A voice from behind a column said, "That one." It was not a bid. It was a decision. The others lowered their fans. The steward did not announce a price. He simply beckoned, and Silvanus followed the man through a curtained archway, away from the platform, away from the murmurs. It was not until they reached the litter waiting outside that he realized who had claimed him. Inside sat the emperor, Domitian. Silvanus had seen his face only once before, on a coin pressed into a cake he had been too afraid to eat. Now he saw it up close, the pockmarked skin, the thinning curls, the eyes that glistened not with lust, but something stranger. Hunger, yes, but also curiosity, calculation, a childlike wonder at how things might break. The emperor did not speak for several minutes. He merely looked. Then, "What's your name?" "Silvanus Dominus." "You look like ivory. You'll rot like meat." He chuckled softly. Silvanus did not smile. That was the first test. What followed were 6 months of observation, not indulgence. Silvanus was not yet touched, not in the way the villa girls had warned him about in whispers. Instead, he was tested, placed in Domitian's dining chamber during private meals, made to stand silently beside the bed while the emperor read scrolls by candlelight, asked to sing during storms, told to undress, then dress again. Nothing overtly cruel, nothing overtly affectionate. Domitian's palace, by then, was already a theater of paranoia. The emperor distrusted his generals, his scribes, even his family. Walls were lined with mirrors to catch spies. Floors were coated in marble that betrayed every footstep. At night, he locked his chambers with 3 iron bolts and slept with a dagger under his pillow. And yet, into this trembling cocoon, he invited Silvanus. It was a calculated gamble. Historians often debate whether Domitian truly loved anyone beyond himself. Most say no. But scroll fragments recovered from the Palatine Hill suggest the emperor once carved a single name into a wax tablet over and over. Silvanus. 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 A madman's mantra or a lover's obsession. We'll never know. What we do know is that the boy became a fixture in the imperial household. Not a slave. Not quite a favorite. Something in between. He was permitted to eat figs from the emperor's private stash, to bathe in the same scented water, to ride in the second litter behind the throne during festivals. Still, he did not speak unless spoken to. Still, he slept on a cot outside the emperor's chamber. Still, His body remained untouched until Saturnalia, the winter solstice. That was when Rome went mad, when the nobles dressed as beggars and beggars wore borrowed togas, when the slaves mocked their masters and the streets echoed with drunken songs and false freedom. It was a time of chaos, masks, and blurred lines. That night, Domitian summoned Silvanus to his private garden. The hedges were burning with lanterns. Incense curled around the statues. Snow fell in fine, dry flakes, caught in the boy's hair like ashes. Domitian was drunk, but alert. He touched Silvanus's chin and said, "You're not a boy anymore." Silvanus did not answer. The emperor reached for him, and the boy let himself be reached. What followed was not violent, nor tender. It was mechanical, inevitable. The moment the contract of silence fulfilled its final clause. In the days that followed, Silvanus was no longer asked to serve at feasts or accompany litters. He was relocated to a smaller, warmer chamber adjoining the emperor's private study. He was fed honey cakes, given a cloak. He was spoken to less, but watched more. He had become property of the highest order. One mainstream account of Domitian's court, written by Suetonius, mentions a boy with eyes like stone, who slept near the emperor's scrolls, and was said to have no shadow. Some historians dismiss this as metaphor. Others suspect it was Silvanus, his presence already mythologized while still alive. But while he floated through marble halls and gold-plated corridors, the rot began to stir beneath. A fringe detail survives from a cook's diary. The boy drinks only goat milk and wine, eats no meat. I worry, he never sweats. And there it was, the first sign that he had become too perfect, too polished. A body that never sweat, never bled, never aged in the eyes of those who fed on his beauty. And as every Roman knew, what doesn't age becomes suspicious. Silvanus slept in silk, but he dreamed in iron. Even as the empire swaddled him in luxury, he began to feel the coldness seep in, not into his skin, but beneath it, like wine spilled into dry stone. His new chamber was nestled between Domitian's study and the perfumed antechamber, where secret letters were written in invisible ink. The walls were lined with books he could not read and portraits that never blinked. The door had no lock, but no one entered unless summoned. He was, by all appearances, a favorite. But in the Roman court, favorite was a word with a half-life. It did not mean cherished. It meant visible, desired, watched. Silvanus had learned long ago to perform elegance like instinct. Now he learned something new, to disappear in plain sight. He walked with quieter steps, stopped wearing the dolphin clasp in his hair, ate slower, laughed less. He began to mimic the statues that lined the corridor outside his room, graceful, expressionless, untouched by time or decay. But the palace was no temple. It was a haunted machine, driven by lust, envy, and fear. And Silvanus, though unarmed, was a weapon by virtue of who touched him. The emperor did not visit nightly, nor did he speak often of the boy in public. But Domitian's fondness was known. And in a palace where affection could mean inheritance, and a shared bed meant influence, even a child's sigh could be interpreted as political thunder. The empress knew. Domitia Longina, once famed for her beauty, and now a queen with a jaw set like marble, never once acknowledged Silvanus aloud. But once, passing him in a hallway, she paused. Her eyes raked him like a tax ledger. Then she said quietly, "You will outlive him, or die worse." She walked on. That night, Silvanus vomited in silence into a golden bowl. He cleaned it himself before dawn. It was the beginning of his education in fear. Fear wore perfume in the palace. It slipped into rooms like a breeze. It cloaked itself in compliments and arrived with figs on silver trays. But it was fear nonetheless. The kind that prickled the neck, that hummed beneath every whispered word. The eunuchs began avoiding eye contact. The steward's smile grew brittle. And once, while bathing, Silvanus found a sliver of glass beneath the soap, a mistake, perhaps, or a message. There were many ways to kill in Rome. Poison was elegant, suffocation cleaner. But the favored method in the palace was suggestion. a rumor, a glance, a missing cup. Let the victim drink from his own dread. Domitian, in his own way, fanned the flames. He began calling Silvanus my little ghost. Sometimes in affection, sometimes in jest. Once in front of a senator, he said, "Even the gods envy what I have in my bed. I should keep him in a shrine." The senator laughed too hard. The empress said nothing. Silvanus, eyes lowered, felt the floor tilt slightly beneath his feet. He had become something impossible. Too beautiful to ignore. Too dangerous to keep. The palace became a velvet prison. Days bled into nights. The boy's skin remained flawless, his posture divine, but inside, he began to decay. He stopped sleeping through the night, developed a trembling in his right hand, which he hid by folding his fingers inside his sleeve. The food tasted like ash. His bones ached from the stillness he was forced to maintain for hours. It was around this time that an old Greek physician began visiting unannounced. He examined Silvanus weekly, tapped his knees, checked his tongue. Once he smelled his breath for nearly a minute, then wrote something down and left without a word. Historians debate what this meant. Some believe Domitian feared Silvanus was ill. Others suggest he was testing his fertility, intending perhaps to breed him to a line of concubines. One theory, rare but persistent, claims the emperor believed the boy was touched by the divine, a kind of living statue gifted by Venus herself. Whatever the truth, the scrutiny increased. And then the letters began. At first, they were simple notes. Folded scraps left on his pillow. Do not drink the wine. Your beauty is a knife. The gods will not save you. Then came a piece of thread knotted 7 times, and a drawing of a skull made from ink and honey. He told no one. There was no one to tell. Instead, he began visiting the gardens at dusk, when the palace was quieter. There, amid the myrtle trees and fluted fountains, he felt less watched. He even began whispering aloud, not prayers exactly, just words, fragments, anything to prove his voice hadn't vanished. And that was when the Praetorian found him. A man named Gallerus, 35, scarred, with a limp from Germania. He did not bow to Silvanus, did not leer. He simply nodded and said, "You walk like your bones are counting." It was the first time anyone had spoken to him like a person in over a year. They began meeting more often, at first by accident, then by pattern. Gallerus brought him pomegranate seeds, hidden in his glove. Once he offered a carved wooden cat. "Ugly," Silvanus said. Gallerus laughed. "It was the best I could steal. It was dangerous." But Silvanus felt something crack inside. Something he hadn't known was frozen. He smiled, and the palace noticed. Soon, the steward began trailing him again. The letters returned, now stained with wax shaped like serpents. Gallerus was reassigned to night duty. Silvanus found blood on his sandal strap one morning. No wound, no source, just a thin smear like a warning. Then, during a banquet, Domitian beckoned Silvanus closer. He whispered, "Do you love me?" The boy didn't answer. Domitian asked again, louder. Still nothing. The emperor's hand moved to the boy's chin, lifted it, and in the candlelight, for just a moment, the illusion broke. Silvanus was no longer flawless. His eyes were rimmed with sleeplessness, his lips dry. A small rash dotted his neck. Domitian let go. Slowly. That night, Silvanus was not summoned. And for 3 nights after, no one knocked. On the 4th night, the emperor's favorite scribe was found drowned in the aqueduct. On the 5th, Gallerus disappeared. And on the 6th, Silvanus woke to find his chamber empty. His clothes gone. His oil spilled. His bed stripped. A note on the floor read, "You are only ever a reflection." Silvanus was not exiled. That would have implied recognition. Instead, he was unremembered. His chamber reassigned to a young flute player from Antioch. His name removed from the staff rosters. The steward who once served him began referring to that room as the silent suite. Even the eunuchs, once deferential, now passed him in the corridors with professional blindness. In the eyes of the palace, He had been unmade, but he remained inside the walls. This was not mercy. It was containment. Domitian had not dismissed him. He had simply stopped looking. And in Rome, to be unseen was to rot while still breathing. Silvanus was relocated to the lower quarters, stone-floored rooms used by former scribes and failed performers. No window. A straw pallet. One oil lamp. He was 16. The change was not sudden. It was surgical. His robes replaced with simple linen. His food downgraded, barley porridge, old apples. Baths every 5th day. And no more goat milk. The message was clear. The illusion had ended. But the watchers had not. He felt it in the walls, eyes not of affection, but of curiosity. The same curiosity that poked at corpses to see how fast they bloated. And still, he did not leave. Where could he go? There was no family, no citizenship, no name in the registry. His entire existence had been curated, polished, and performed within this marble cage. Outside, he would be a vagabond at best, a liability at worst. So he adapted. He stopped brushing his hair, stopped responding to the name Silvanus when the stewards mocked him, began eating in silence, sleeping less, listening more. And the palace whispered. It always whispered. There were rumors of plots, of Domitian's secret executions, of a new astrologer who read omens from spilled lamp oil. One tale claimed the emperor now surrounded himself with mirrors, not out of vanity, but to see assassins approaching from every angle. But perhaps the most absurd rumor of all, Domitian had taken to sleeping in a different chamber every night, convinced death was searching for him like a jealous lover. And maybe he wasn't wrong. The Senate loathed him. The army feared him. His own household was a coil of suspicion and pretense. Assassins didn't need to be hired in Rome. They simply had to be patient. And amid this slow unraveling, Silvanus remained. A ghost. Not dead. Not useful. But still dangerous in memory. And then one day, a scroll appeared at his door. Unsealed. Unmarked. Inside a single line. You are requested in the imperial latrine. It was not a jest. He obeyed. The latrine in question was not public. It was a private facility on the emperor's wing, tiled in blue marble and scented with myrrh. He entered. Waited. The door closed behind him. Locked. Domitian was not there. Instead, the empress. Domitia Longina stood beside the drain. No servants. No guards. Just her. And the stench. It was not symbolic. It was strategic. No one eavesdrops in a sewer. She looked at him for a long time before speaking. Then, do you want him dead? Silvanus blinked. I want to leave. She nodded. Good answer. But not the one I need. He said nothing. She stepped closer. Smelled of wine and some kind of dry herb. You were a favorite. That matters. There are eyes on you still. That matters more. He whispered, he will know. No, she said. He won't. Not unless you tell him. A silence. Then she handed him a small ceramic vial, stoppered with wax. No label. Use it or don't. But if you're questioned, say it came from the kitchens. He left without another word. The next 3 days passed in a blur of rehearsed normalcy. He ate. He walked. He cleaned his own floor. The vial sat beneath his mattress, warm from the lamp. On the 4th night, the emperor summoned him. The old room. The same pillows. The same candles. Even the same statue of Mars watching from the alcove. Domitian was older. Thinner. His face now lined with doubt, not decadence. The hand that once gripped scepters now trembled when it reached for his wine. I dreamed about you, he said, voice quiet. Silvanus said nothing. The emperor smiled, almost kindly. I was cruel. I am cruel. A pause. You were the most beautiful lie I ever touched. Then he turned away, dismissed the boy with a gesture. No punishment. No warning. Just a soft wave, like brushing ash from a table. Silvanus did not sleep that night. He did not open the vial. He buried it in the garden, under a laurel tree. It was not mercy. It was surrender. But 2 weeks later, Domitian was dead, stabbed by a freedman named Stephanus during a staged petition. The emperor died on the floor of his chamber, clutching his stomach, staring at a broken mirror. Sylvanus heard the news from a guard. The man grinned. "Your god is dead, little ghost." Rome did not mourn. Within hours, the statues of Domitian were defaced. His name struck from inscriptions. His portraits burned. The Senate rejoiced, declaring damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. The empire itself tried to erase him. But you can't unwrite a scar. Sylvanus watched as the palace reoriented itself, like a ship finding new wind. New names. New alliances. He remained. No longer a threat. No longer desired. Just a boy grown older in a city that had already moved on. One historian later wrote, "There was once a concubine who outlived a god. He walked the gardens for years, looking for the man who had touched him and found only statues without faces." This was the period when Sylvanus changed. He no longer spoke, not out of defiance, but because words had become ornamental. His silence was the last vestige of control. He became a curiosity, then a rumor, then a myth. The boy who had loved an emperor and survived. A philosopher wrote of him as a symbol of impermanence. A poet dedicated a line, "Ivory made flesh, left to yellow in the sun." A kitchen servant swore he saw the boy light a candle in Domitian's old chamber each Saturnalia, never speaking, never blinking. Was it grief? Was it ritual? Or something darker? A slave once claimed Sylvanus had no reflection. Another insisted his hair never grew, his skin never wrinkled. He ate nothing, the woman wrote, but apricots and wind. Scholars argue about the records. Some say he died 2 years later. Others believe he wandered the hills of Alba, cloaked in white, warning children not to grow beautiful. There is no grave. There never was. The years passed. The emperors changed. And still, somewhere in the shadowed margins of Rome, Sylvanus remained. Not the boy he had been, but not quite anything else. He aged, but unevenly. Some said the years had forgotten him, as if the gods had left a finger pressed on his timeline, keeping him paused just shy of ruin. Others insisted he was simply lucky. Good skin, poor lighting, and a diet of solitude. But those who glimpsed him on fog-heavy mornings, stepping barefoot across the stones of Palatine Hill, saw more than a man. They saw a relic, and relics in Rome were never merely objects. They were symbols, instruments, omens. Under Trajan, Rome turned outward, conquest, expansion, a golden age carved in blood. The court became crisper, militarized, less decadent. Concubines were unfashionable. Sylvanus was irrelevant. But still he was watched. One night, a senator's wife sent him a note offering patronage. He returned it unopened. Another offered to keep him as a house spirit, a symbol of vanished imperial grace. He declined. He did not want pity. He did not want power. He wanted, though he could never have said it, dissolution. But history has a cruel appetite, and it is not known for letting its witnesses vanish. By Hadrian's reign, Sylvanus had become folklore. Mothers whispered of the emperor's echo, who cursed beauty with silence. Temple workers claimed a pale man came once a year to lay olive leaves on the altar of Nemesis. The poet Juvenal, in a biting satire, referred to him only as the courtesan of corpses, a withering reference to those whose intimacy had outlived their lovers. But perhaps the strangest account comes from the physician Cyrenus of Ephesus. In his writings on hysteria and melancholia, Cyrenus notes a case, a male of uncertain age, formerly in imperial service, afflicted by long silences, insomnia, and periodic hallucinations of being summoned. He refuses meat, speaks only in fragments of Greek myth, and claims to smell blood even in rain. Cyrenus prescribed rosewater, music, and enforced companionship. It didn't work. The patient vanished from the clinic before the third session. Some say Sylvanus began haunting the necropolis beneath the old Domitian wing, laying flowers at the sealed entrance. Others claim he joined a mystery cult in the hills, where initiates wore veils and worshipped the silence between prayers. But most agree on one final sighting. It came during the festival of Saturn, in the 17th year of Hadrian's rule. The palace was open, torches lit, garlands draped like entrails across the columns. A play was being performed in the courtyard, a satire mocking Domitian's paranoia, featuring an actor in chalk-white paint and golden sandals. And there, near the back of the crowd, a man stood alone, slim, still, watching. He did not laugh, did not speak, but those who turned to look felt inexplicably ashamed, as if they had mocked something sacred, as if they had desecrated a grave. When the play ended, he was gone. The actor playing Domitian died 3 days later of fever. Coincidence, they said. Rome is built on coincidences. And so the boy who had once been Silvanus became a ripple in the empire's bloodstream. A rumor passed between generations. A ghost preserved not by belief, but by the inability to forget. In one fragment of a lost tragedy by Pacuvius, a character cries out, "Do not make me a god, if I must be remembered this way." Perhaps Silvanus would have agreed. He had not wanted eternity. He had wanted to be loved, and then to be left alone. But Rome does not leave alone what it once possessed. It catalogs. It revives. It reshapes. And somewhere beneath the palace floor, in the cold breath of the substructures, the echo of soft footsteps still linger. Unhurried, unwelcomed, unclaimed. Wind down 300 words. Time moved on, as it always does. The marble was replaced. The frescoes repainted. The chambers repurposed or forgotten entirely. Emperors rose and fell with the same rhythm as tides, their names etched into coins, then worn smooth by centuries of circulation. But Silvanus did not rise or fall. He reseated, not buried, not mourned, but diffused into memory like dust into sunlight. His story, once vivid, blurred into a kind of collective murmur, a soft unease that outlived the facts. In the end, Rome remembered him not for his beauty, nor his rise, nor even his fall, but for his silence. That profound, unsettling silence. It spoke louder than any decree. It lingered longer than any sculpture. There is comfort, perhaps, in knowing that even in the most brutal machines of power, something human survives. A trembling hand, a whispered refusal, a boy who chose not to kill, and in doing so, was forgotten by those who killed without thought. The tragic life of a male concubine in the Roman Empire is not a tale of triumph. It is a tale of erosion, of a soul shaped by hands that believe themselves divine, and of what remains when the divine loses interest. And so we leave him now, not with judgment, not with pity, but with a kind of hush. The hush of memory turning to myth, of marble softening under centuries of rain, of a voice once forced to perform, choosing instead to disappear. And if some night you find yourself walking the ruins of a Roman palace, and the wind seems to carry a sigh that isn't yours, pause. It may be nothing, or it may be him, still beautiful, still watching, still waiting to be left alone.